Why is this thing not? What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show. As always, I'd like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. And I'm also a certified empowerment coach and president and CEO of Express Your Vibe Coaching and Communications. But it's Wednesday night, and if you don't know what's going down on Wednesday night, you're going to find out real quick. Wednesday nights, around 9:30 Eastern Time, we have Stuff, and Stuff is online conversations hosted by myself and the wonderful lady Jazz Keys from Rockford, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. And welcome, Jazz. What's been going on?
Hey, nothing much. Just really ramping up to, as you guys can see, kind of the artwork and stuff in the background, ramping up to get ready to open up the doors on a community workspace. So really just pushing the envelope around here and day in, day out. But other than that, same old, same old.
And how's the boss of the house?
Still the boss, as always.
Exactly.
That's what happens when you empower and push decision making and leadership in a young child. By 6 years old, she runs the show.
No, my goodness. Well, just give a short little bio on yourself and share yourself with our listeners and watchers.
Cool. Yeah, so I am the co-host or host, whichever way you want to say it. We host this together, the Wednesday night show called Stuff, where I am a clinical psychologist, a life coach, author, and speaker. And so I've done everything from contribute empowerment and wellness and love pieces to Jet and Ebony to writing my first book to international travel. So I get an opportunity to talk about things from the perspective of a Black woman on this show. And so we're really excited to see where this particular show grows to. And as always, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's growing in the right direction, so it's all good.
Yeah.
It's all good. Absolutely. And our special guest for the second week in a row is Dr. Marvin Thompson. How are you, Dr. Thompson?
Man, I'm great. We made it. We made it this time.
Yes, after last week's little kerfuffle, we're actually visual to the world tonight.
Nice.
So Dr. T, give a little background about yourself to our wonderful viewers around the world.
Well, this is my least favorite part of
I know,
discussion.
That's why you just keep it short, brother. Keep it short.
Dr. T.
It is. It's hard to do. I guess the reason I'm here is my background as an educator. This is my 26th year.
Wow.
In education, and I have I've worked in every position you can possibly hold, from teacher to superintendent, and I've been a consultant for the last 12 years in education, and my focus has always been about capacity building. Many people refer to it as a change agent, but I narrow that focus because there's a lot of nuances in education rather than just broad concept of change. It's more about a methodology and a process. So I'm a systems-driven, quote-unquote, change agent, if you have to put a label to it.
Nice. Very nice. Well, Dr. T, myself, and Jazz, we had an epic conversation last week, and the title of the conversation was, "Is education still the equalizer for Blacks?" And it was so good that we had to have a part two. And before I go any further, thank you for everyone who's jumped on live. Please feel free to ask any questions, make any comments, and we will address them to the best of our ability in real time. And also big thanks to people who will be watching the replay who can't watch this live. So we're going to continue on our conversation this weekend. Just before we went live, Dr. T was sharing a great story with Jazz. I said, Dr. T, put the brakes on that. We got to hear this live. So Dr. T, why don't you give a little background of what you were sharing with us just before we went live?
Well, our discussion last week brought out a lot of questions, and today I had 3 phone calls from different parts of the country and from people in education at 3 different levels. One worked at the State Department in their state, the other was a teacher, and the other was an administrator. And they were all 3 women of three different backgrounds in different cultures: white female, Latina female, and a black female. and they all brought questions around systems. And one of the common threads in all of the three discussions was a reflection on their existing systems. And it really came down to the way they thought and how the system thought. And it ultimately led to why they were doing what they were doing. And as I say oftentimes, especially with failing schools or successful schools, whatever you're doing is a part of a system that you've developed. And we explored their systems, we explored their culture, which is a lot of where their conversations were. And once they got there, they began to understand how they've been engineered to respond to the system. Mm-hmm. So a lot of this is about political engineering and institutional engineering. So, a lot of beliefs have to be challenged under this conversation that we're talking about. And that was probably the most powerful aspect of all three discussions.
Dr. T, I'm going to, and Jazz, jump in. I know Jazz was on fire last week. We had to, pull up my shorts a little bit to make sure I show my respect and, keep up with Jazz, because Jazz was on fire last week. That's FIYAH. She was on fire last week.
Gotta write that down.
Yeah. So you make an interesting point there. What sort of mindset are our educators going into when they become a teacher in today's American public school system? And how does that affect them dealing with children of color?
Well, I like the fact that the name of the topic, right? So the whole premise has to first be addressed to create a paradigm shift to understand this conversation. Number one, we assume when we say equalizer, what are we equalizing? Are we equalizing access to education? Are we equalizing economic opportunities? So there you have to do as an equalizer.
Okay,
So
Dr. T. Okay, Dr. T. I want to interrupt you right there, and I tell you, this week I'm gonna come after you in a good way. This week, is it not a goal to have both those addressed in regards to equalization?
Well, here's the problem at the core of it. If you put that question to the system, then you're not going to get what you're after. This is a self-determining decision that's made by the learner. And when we're talking about it in the context of the Black community, that is the core issue at hand. The system, as I said this last week, was not designed for us as a model reflecting our specific needs. It responded to our conditions, but it did not respond to our needs. Those are two different things.
To our conditions. I love that. I have a question, and it's more speaking to kind of the direction that we were heading when you were explaining just the feedback that you received. Were the individuals who called, were they suggesting that they are attempting to educate in a broken system, and so that's why it can be perceived as teachers not being successful in the class? Was that the argument, or were they just looking to have a discussion or looking to try to understand, well, how do we actually exemplify great teaching in a unhealthy system?
Good question. Every single one of those conversations had one common theme: leadership. Leadership was at the core of every single one of those conversations. How leadership guided teachers, how leadership responded to teachers, and how leadership created or produced solutions. So when, in the context of leadership, what they all spoke to was the same old, same old. Mm-hmm. It was a repackaging of the same solution, and they were ultimately getting the same results. The issues in leadership range from the inability or unwillingness of leaders to really create solutions that were easily replicated, that grew teachers, that actually asked them to give input and to develop them as teacher leaders. All of these were common threads amongst all of them. What was interesting was, and all three of these individuals listened to last week's conversation, and this is where they called to kind of maybe get a heads up of what we might talk about tonight, and I went, I have no clue. I don't know where it's going to go. That's the beauty of it.
That's true.
So that's when I said, well, why don't you throw out some information to me?
Okay.
Again, all of these things happen within about a 4-hour span.
Wow.
And this is when I went, wow, leadership is a huge issue. As it relates to the Black community, one of the common responses I gave was asking them, how did each of their entities view the needs of the Black community? And this was an interesting response from one of the people who worked at the State Department level. They asked, the common question asked at that level was, how much experience do you have working with Black youth? I'm like, well,
okay.
What was the follow-up? Because I'm waiting for, okay, good. If the answer was yes, what was the follow-up question that leads to, the gotcha or the get? Well, it stopped there. And that was telling. And this is why this person called and they expressed frustration about it. And what their takeaway was that question was a qualifier to you go handle that problem since you know them. You're going to be our go-to. Now, this is someone from the State Department who is going, this is not where we need to be. Mm-hmm. This, and the question put to me was, how do I get them to see this? And I said, well, you're not. You're not going to be a change agent as an individual. What you can be is a transformational agent. You can transform the way they view things. And we discussed strategies about how to do it. But the takeaway from that conversation was how broadly the existing structure of our schools limits the view of minorities and how the system limits its response to the needs. They've responded to our condition, but not our needs. And that's why education cannot be viewed as an equalizer from the vantage point of what the system can do for us to equalize things. We have to be self-determinant about what we want as outcomes, whether it is for an opportunity to participate in the capitalistic economy that we have,
right, or
for self-efficacy or self-awareness. We have to determine that so we can make education a resource for our goals and not be a resource for an existing system.
Yeah. I feel like I struggle because the conversation can go so many different routes. And I think Dr. Bobby, do you have a question on the
No, I've got many, but I will continue on here then. So Dr. T, you sounded correctly, if I'm wrong, that the Black environment has to determine what it wants.
From the individual, let me start with, and this is something conversations I've had with parents over the last 20 or so years. Invariably, when I find a student of color who's struggling, it's not because they're struggling because the system always is doing something wrong to them or not meeting their needs. It's that they haven't set a standard for what the system should be giving them. And oftentimes I'll sit across from moms, absent the child, and say, okay, Ms. Smith, tell me what you wanted for Johnny. What do you want for Johnny? And they'll tell me what every parent says. I want him to be successful. Stop there, Ms. Smith. What's success look like right now?
Right.
And of course they can tell me. And I'll go, good. Does Johnny know that? And they'll always say, of course he does. And they'll start with, I tell him all the time. I yell at him and I push him. I'm like, that's just reinforcing your expectations on what he hasn't done. I'm asking you a different question. What are you saying to Johnny about what school is and what he's capable of and how you're reinforcing those expectations? And the conversation takes a 180. And invariably, it starts this way. I don't know. And I say, well, good. Let's have that conversation between you and me. Mm-hmm. And we actually role play. And these are conversations when we talk about generational poverty. And I said this in the last show. And this is where the system isn't responsive to our needs. They're responsive to our condition. If you're going to meet our needs, you have to first know what I expect. You then have to know where I'm coming from, and then you have to know my capacities to take me to where I want to be. On the other end of it, we have to develop that voice and feel comfortable not challenging the system, but stating to the system those expectations to reach my goal. Yeah. We have been limited in our community, and our parents, this is where we have found our voice. I can say this, when it comes to the way our kids are mistreated in schools. Right? We come in and we're defensive about that. Don't talk to my child that way. Don't do this to my kid. I think those are great starting points for us. It took us a long time to get to that point, so I don't want to minimize that. However, we are now at a juncture where it requires us to elevate our voice with much deeper understanding, not only of how to communicate to the system, but first begin with clarifying what our expectations are for ourselves. So when I say we need to start dictating our needs to the system and hold them accountable to meeting our needs and not our condition, that's where it needs to start. That's when education becomes an equalizer. That's when we make it a system that forces it to change for us.
Yeah, I agree. I think that up until this point, we do have a very reaction or a responsive approach to schooling, where it's like, I go where I can defend, I go where I have to stand as the person of authority. But other than that, we become very passive. And that's along the lines of checking to see if your homework got done, not necessarily checking to see like what's happening in your day-to-day, or checking to make sure things are flowing smoothly, and just kind of like looking at the outer shell. And so I think what I heard you say a lot is we have to get much more participatory in the way in which we move in and out of our school systems and what we ask of them. Because right now it is a very passive system. Go to school, get good grades, right? Right. I don't know what that looks like on a day-to-day. I don't know what your teachers are necessarily teaching you. I'm not really, completely immersed in the process of the school, but I feel like you are excelling if you bring home certain grades. And so I believe that kind of taking that passive approach is one of the reasons why now we're looking at it and we're saying, even if my kid is getting good grades, they're not being set up for success. Or if my kid is getting bad grades or are getting bad grades, that's not a reason for me to reinforce the system. That's a reason for me to become much more assertive about what's happening and really getting to the root of it. And so I really appreciate that mention and that approach, because I do think that requires a shift on our end.
Okay, all right.
Definitely.
Well, when you look at the system, if you want to evaluate that idea, you take a look at how we measure our kids. We measure them in groups. 25 years ago, prior to No Child Left Behind, we were using testing, but we were using norm reference testing, not to improve children, but to improve the system to help children. Now we've gone to criterion reference tests, not to help children directly, but to help the system to help children.
Right.
So we have always relied on a system with the assumption that its motive was to create equity and be an equalizer in the disparities that exist in our society. Again, one of the fallacies of the system, because since over the last 30, 40 years, we have watched social issues be pushed onto schools. So we have teachers, we have principals, we have systems themselves that are totally overwhelmed with meeting the needs of all children. And as long as we are engineered to accept that type of thinking, and this was the core of all three conversations I had today, we have to stop for a second and ask ourselves, how much of my engagement with schools is my own choosing, or what I've been engineered to respond to?
Good point. Very good point. So, Dr. T, I'm going to take it to another level here. For education, for many blacks to be that great equalizer, they have to take the education system seriously. Do you think that many blacks are taking the education system seriously? And if they are, great. If not, why and what do they need to do to take it seriously?
I love the way you asked that question.
Well, I've asked one or two over the years, and okay.
It was very clean.
It was very clean. So my response to that is, stop looking at the education system. Doesn't matter. And I'll tell you why it doesn't matter. We've had this conversation before too. We know several things. This is a system that has yet to close the achievement gap for students of color. It hasn't. As a matter of fact, it's widened. So accept that reality and ask yourself, if I keep relying on it, what evidence do I have that it is doing what it says it's set out to do? There is none. You might find pockets of it. You will find silos of it. But what you haven't found is replication of good, sound strategies that improve student learning outcomes for the masses, particularly the population we're speaking to. So to answer your question, the first thing to change is remove the education system from your mental thoughts and processes. The reason is also we have, under our current administration, the third, fourth tier of closing down and privatizing our public school systems. So that mental model that you have about our educational system, not only is it going away, it's already gone. It's not transforming, it already has transformed. So let's not wait for the other shoe to drop. We are a little over a year and a half away from the education department itself being gone. It's currently being dismantled. You have to look no further than the Office of Civil Rights under Betsy DeVos being diminished. They've already stated clearly that they're going to pursue fewer and fewer discrimination cases. That's not just race. We're talking about special needs in every other domain. So this administration is turning over the authority for decision making back to the states. And ask yourself this question: what role did the states play in the success of schools prior to the government oversight?
Right.
It was actually the reason the government got involved, because we were doing so poorly. So we have to remove education system from our mind. We have to look at schooling and learning. Replace education system to schooling and learning. And that's when we begin to own it. And this is a paradigm shift about how we even walk through the door. It is a service. We have to look at it no different than going into any store, going to your mechanic. It's my car. This is how I want it to run. This is what I know about it. You tell me what needs to be fixed. If it's not fixed to my satisfaction, I'm going to speak to it. The education system offers no guarantees. It offers no guarantees. It offers opportunity. And when we start looking at the disparities, the existing disparities in the black community, before we even walk into the door, starting at kindergarten, it does not readjust itself in terms of quality to meet our needs. It adjusts itself to meet our conditions as a compliance requirement.
Right.
It's able to say, we provide this service for these kids and we're good at providing this service. But it doesn't measure the success of those outcomes. Success is measured by its continuation of it, how much it grows, and how much dependency it goes. Education is great at identifying problems and creating solutions to justify their actions, but it doesn't reward itself on real positive and consistent growth of outcomes. It rewards itself on growth of more systems within the system.
Right. So Dr. T, I have a question. And again, this conversation is so multi-layered, so it could literally go any direction. But I kind of want to bring it home for our listeners who are really in the state of maybe myself or just other individuals that are not really knowing where they can fall into place on a being at the table where decisions made, or maybe serving in board, or in places where we have a political conversation or a voice where we can begin to influence in that space. But we do want to safeguard our children in a school that we know is, overseen by a broken system. So me being a single mother or any other parent out there, from this day moving forward, what are some things to be conscious of as our children are currently in the systems, and the bigger system keeps us seeking economics that don't allow us to necessarily remove them physically from it? What can we do to really ensure that on a day-to-day our children and children like our children are receiving what they need on a school level or on an individual level. And I hope I made that clear.
You did. Okay. You know, one of the biggest barriers that I find with underprivileged children, regardless of race, this is an economic issue. Poverty is a mindset, and it's also a condition. One of the biggest barriers to our young people being successful on state standardized tests, or just in the classroom in general, is vocabulary and context. Ooh. Those are the biggest barriers. So no whether you're looking at a test or you're just looking at regular classwork or coursework, the biggest barriers is vocabulary. Let me give you a good example. And Dr. Vibe, you know I've shared this multiple times over the course of our conversations. A child, a middle class or up and up student walks into kindergarten with a 10 to 15,000 word vocabulary.
Right.
A child of poverty walks into kindergarten with a 3 to 5,000 word vocabulary. Now, on the face of it, you might go, well, we can close that gap. When you start looking at the scaffolding nature of K through 3, this is why third grade students, minorities, particularly black males, continue to fail at high rates at third grade. And in fourth grade, you see their interest drop off. It's not because of an age issue. There are multiple. But one of the key barriers is boredom. It looks like boredom. What it is really going, all right, this is the second year in a row, I'm not getting it. Vocabulary in kindergarten is word identification. When you get into first grade, you start looking at words and putting together small sentences. When you get into second grade, you start looking at paragraphs. When you get into third grade, you're looking at comprehension and longer paragraphs. So you're now really moving into comprehension skills as a primary focus for reading. And I'm
still stuck on words.
And if you will come in 10,000 words below, you're spending your first 3 years catching up with just vocabulary acquisition. So that kid who looks like, oh, Johnny's smart. Johnny's not smart. His parents spoke to him in full sentences.
Yes.
Right? And there is a unique, this is where, and God knows, I see this even in high school in poverty. Conversations are very short. They're emotion driven. They're emotion filled. Boy, you need to do this. Girl, you need to stop. I told you. Well, that emotional response elicits emotional conditioning.
Right.
Teachers don't talk like that. The curriculum's not written like that. I don't care who's teaching you. So vocabulary is huge. This is why we always talk about early childhood education is always about exposing your children to words and reading to them.
Yes.
It's syntax, it's context. And schooling, this is amazing. When you don't set limitations on kids about their capacities, they will challenge your capacities. And children acquire knowledge and words. This is where their verbal skill development is at its highest peak at their youngest ages. And what happens is we stunt that before we even get to kindergarten because we say, well, the school will take care of that. They'll teach them their letters. They'll teach them their colors.
Yes.
And I always tell parents to prepare your child like they're going to the NBA. Because the guy who made it to the NBA,
somebody trained him at home.
He or she knows one thing. My goal is the same goal as about 100,000 other kids. And somebody out there is practicing harder than me to get the same job. I just haven't met them yet.
Right.
And you need to be prepared when you do meet that I'm equally skilled. And right now, children of poverty walk in the door so far behind because, and I'm going to turn this full circle, Dr. Vibe, because we're relying on the educational system to deliver and close that gap for us.
Yes, that's exactly what I spoke to earlier about removing the passive approach that we take to education. It's very much that. And so I thank you for driving home that point what for me, I feel like even working in education systems, working with youth, even mentoring, it's really the component of what gem can I give to parents? What information can I pass? Aside from the things that I do in just my parenting, but that are like quick and simple that you can begin helping us create this ripple that will be long-standing. And I love how clean it is to just say, okay, we have to read to our children. We have to get their vocabulary up to par. We have to train them outside of the school system, because that's 100%. By that 4th grade, they're not reading proficiently. We're going to definitely, more than likely, see them be part of these statistics. And so thank you for that powerful information that can be used like today.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, definitely. And I just want to shout out our live viewers. They have a comment here. Whitney Gray saying that would explain why Mississippi takes a reading test in 3rd grade that must be passed in order to be promoted, no matter what your grades are.
Well, let's back up to the social issues of this. Remember the equalizer. Understand one thing. All systems, and this is something I really need people to understand. When you hear the word system, that system is not designed for you. It is a mass production system. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're black, you're white. I don't care where you are. Some of us walk into that system with advantages because the system was designed with some of us in mind, whether it be by our skin color or by our capacities. You know, the 3 of us and probably some of our listeners probably did well in the system because we were prepared for what that system was going to do for us.
Oh, yeah.
But we are talking about, I'm in the context of this conversation, my mind automatically goes to those that are not excelling or achieving in this system. So I want to be real clear about that. I'm not talking about us. I'm talking about those who are being left behind and wanting them to create a huge paradigm shift in their view of this system, to no longer look at it as its obligation to you. It is not a structural obligation designed at all to meet your needs. It is designed to provide a service, and in the carrying out of that mission, it has evolved, and I would say probably devolved, into a huge system that keeps narrowing its focus on a small population and coming up with reactions to our needs rather than an integration of sound strategies that not only bring our voices to the table, because they're totally absent.
Yes.
They handpick the voices that they want from our populations that don't disrupt what they have.
And I 100% agree with that. I remember coming out of college and being in a position, and the first time I walked into a boardroom, I had to be like 23, and what you say when you're like, okay, I'm not talking about those of us who have been able to kind of come through the system and navigate and find our way, but I'm talking about the us that are left behind, because they're still us. But I remember sitting there, and I believe the topic on the table had to do with education, actually, and everyone around me that were making the decisions were making decisions for us and had no idea our day-to-day real life experiences. And so what they were cultivating, I had to interject and say, you know, this doesn't make sense given the following. But had I not been that small voice at that time, I had a small voice at that time, not any longer, but had I not have been that small voice, I literally left that meeting thinking, wow, these are the people that are deciding for us, and they have no idea what it's like to be us or our daily experiences. So it's never going to serve us the way in which it should. And so I think that just drives home the point that we do have to put our feet under the table and be able to be bold and boisterous enough to not be the person that's like, okay, well, hey, we do have, you know, one of them on our board, or we do have them serving, but they don't make a whole lot of noise. No, like, we need those of us who are ready to storm through the doors and say something has to change yesterday. So I believe that's a very powerful point. Thank you.
Well, I just want to add to that a phrase that I always use, that I say that you're either at the table or on the table.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So Curtis Brooks, who was with us last week, is back again, and he has a question for you, Dr. T. He's asking, was the public education system ever designed for anyone to succeed?
Yes, it was originally, but it wasn't the masses. If you take a look at education historically, it was an opportunistic system. It was not one that was created when we created the government, right? So go back to, you guys watch these old Westerns. There's some old school mom getting off, they're starting the town, and the town sends away for a teacher. Right? So understand that. When you watch these movies, there's a little history in all of these. So who sent away for the teacher? Was it to educate the poor farmer? Was it to educate the newly freed slaves? We know that's not true. Those school marms were sent away for the merchants to educate their children to replace themselves to maintain their wealth. I'm not going to give it up. If I started this store in Montana, and I've got 3 kids, well, I'm not going to die and leave it to Jimmy the drunk over here to come over and take. I'm going to give it to my son. So, son, you're going to learn to read. You're going to learn to do this. Well, as people of wealth begin to see the benefits of it and our communities begin to grow, all of a sudden, Horace Mann comes along, creates the first school, and communities begin to flourish and develop. Our government years later went, wait a minute, I see an opportunity here. So where was the opportunity? Less mandate, and of course we also know Upton Sinclair's the concrete, I think it's a concrete jungle, blackboard jungle. Out of all of this, we had child labor laws. Kids were working. They were in factories. Everything was about capitalism. And you can tie this to women going to work. Women didn't go to work because we said, oh, ladies, go off to work. They went to work because we're in World War II and we needed them to go work in the factories to build munitions to carry out this war. And because companies were making so much money, when the men came back, they go, well, we ain't losing this.
Right.
Education is no different. And when you look at it from the black perspective, we were already in an unequal system. We looked around and said, well, they're gaining. We need to do the same thing. We created our own teachers. And if you go back to the early 40s, 50s, and even the 60s, our most professional community came out of the teaching corps. Our professionals, the ones we lauded next to the pastor in our community, was the teacher. God knows if you became a principal, you were a god, because we knew that was our equalizer. Well, as we started seeing economic growth in our communities before integration, that's when it was valued. So the things I'm talking about are not new paradigms for the black community. They are lost paradigms over the last 3 generations that we need to recapture as this system resegregates. It's just resegregating differently. We have to look no further than Mississippi, where a judge, and I said this last week, reminded the audience, where a judge allowed a white community to resegregate on the sole basis that they wanted to maintain a white school district.
Right.
This phenomenon is happening more and more around the country. At the same time, when they don't have to go to a charter, continue to use their existing system, they're going to bring in charters to replace the public school system. So we're seeing this happen. Again, this is why we need to return to that particular mindset. And to your question, Jazz, earlier, here's why this is also significant. At the same time we have this structural shift in education, we also have fewer black educators.
Yes.
We do not have the same number of educators we had during that early period of our educational system, even when it was unequal. I'm here in New Orleans, the largest charter system in the country. And in order for that charter system to even get off the ground, they got rid of all the black teachers in this town. So we went from an 80% majority black teaching corps to now an 80% majority white teaching corps with over 90% black students in the public school system, literally 180. Now they're realizing that was a mistake. Well, how many kids did you fail when you created that paradigm shift for the system and ultimately a paradigm shift for the community? So we have to now move. This is why we have to. And we also, at the same time, we have more present black and brown bodies in education. We also have fewer of them going into education. So that trend is not going to change over the next 30 years. This is why we have to have a different mindset about how we approach education. And Dr. Vibe, not to, beat you to death on this, but I'm glad you asked the question, because the very statement you made is something that is engineered in the minds of Black America to, when they talk about education, we say the education system. It's not the word, It's the intent behind the words that are unstated, but they're very internalized. And we have to redo that whole do a total mental shift about that.
Complete reprogramming. I 100% agree.
Dr. T, you read my mind, because one of the solutions I wanted from you tonight, let me actually, before I get there, Curtis Brooks wants to speak about, can you speak about black male teachers? Where are they? And I think that is what I was going to get to, is about one of the equalizing factors, in my opinion, is we need more blacks in the classroom teaching, especially black men. How can that be achieved in order to at least make this equalization goal more realistic?
Curtis, I love you. That's the best question. I just read the other day a statistic, and I did not know this. Do you know that only 2% of all educators are black males? This tells you
I know that.
2%.
Yep, that's
in
true.
This country. But let me answer that question in two ways. We need to encourage more black males to go into the profession, but we first have to ask ourselves, before we encourage it, why set another black man on, well, this is your responsibility, give something back?
Yes.
I can tell you this, and I have the article to prove it. Dr. Vibe, I'll send it to you. I was interviewed twice when I graduated from college, because I was I was like, why are these people interviewing me? Why are all the newspapers coming out to interview me? And it wasn't until I got into my job that I realized there's nobody that looks like me. I'm it. I don't see any other brothers here. Not even in the class, not only not in the classroom, but I also didn't see them in administration. Why? Number one, the pay is low. How am I going to raise a family off of, at the time, $24,500 a year starting salary that grows at what, 2% a year? By the time I retire, I'll be making less than the manager at 7-Eleven.
For a 60-plus hour work week, easy.
Easy. And all the stress, I don't think so. So I already knew, I set a term limit on my time in the classroom, not only for my family's benefit, but also for my professional growth. That's one aspect of it. But here's probably the most important aspect of it. The roles that black educators, not just men, play once we get into the system. See, there's another pattern that's not in welcoming or inviting. I've experienced this over my 26 years at every level. Rising to the top as superintendent is not easy in a system where there are very, very few black males or black leaders at that level in general. And even when they are, here's where you find them. And you find them in very specific conditions. As my dad said to me before he died, and he died the day before I started my very first teaching position, first administrative position. He was so proud. Keep in mind, this is a man born during segregation. He was born in 1938. The mere fact that his son was a teacher was a huge deal. Keep in mind the era he grew up. My son's a teacher. That old school, that if I never did anything else in my life, for that generation, that's a good deal. Well, in a matter of 4 years, you're an assistant principal. So my dad went out. I had this Jeep that the carpet was all messed up. I came home one day, my car wasn't home, and his car was there. And where's my car? My dad had sent my car out to some auto body shop to have the whole thing restored. He's like, well, you might be driving important people around. I'm like, dude, you need to chill. That's pride.
Right.
What I found in my 26 years was, and this happened to me, you are seen as a disciplinarian of your black kids or all kids in general. Your role is relegated to that. You want to rise to the top, and once you get into administration, you know what your duties are going to be? You're going to take care of the discipline. You'll do the tasks that I don't want. You will be the spokesperson for the black community. I'll call on you when I get in trouble, and you go speak for me, you know, and have my back. I'm just being honest. I've seen this. And God forbid you call the system out on its inequity, on its practices. You're a troublemaker.
Yep.
And you don't have many voices backing you up in the system. You are already seen as a potential threat to the system. So you have a choice. You want to keep feeding that family? You want to keep rising up the ladder? You're either going to get along. If you're going to make suggestions, you give them to me to filter, and then I'll put my own stamp on it. But you're not going to bring me anything that you're going to claim as yours. Now, I never did that. When it got there, I was like, you can take that and you can ride off. I'll go do this on my own. I was fortunate. I worked for progressive leaders and I was always up front. And being up front meant ask the questions that you have the answers to rather than wait for their answers.
Yep.
And you have to gain credibility there. And I'm going full circle, Curtis, so I hope I'm not losing you. Number one, if we're going to encourage black men to go in, we have to get in front of them and demand more of the system on their behalf. Absolutely. So this isn't just the student we have to ask more of. And it's not good enough to put a black face at the head of your district or the head of your school just because your school is getting browner. And you see that trend happening all the time. I saw that growing up. I've had people used to call me up, and my dad said, you're always going to get the fixer-uppers. Well, guess what I always got? The fixer-uppers, right? They didn't call me to go take over a school that was growing. They took over a school where it was predominantly black and failing and went, okay, we'll put that black face on it. If it works, good luck. But the main thing you need to do, this is all I always got, keep the circus under the tent.
Yes.
Right? So, and when you go in and you start having success, I've experienced this. I've had colleagues who've experienced this. You get challenged for not following the edicts of the system, which resulted in low performance. Again, I was very fortunate. I worked for 3 state superintendents, and 2 of them became state superintendents. That's how good of leaders they were. I never worked for a weak leader. I always worked for progressive people, but I also chose those progressive people. I also walked away from non-progressive people. And that's something we have to do more of as educators. Absolutely. We have to be collective and we have to call that out. But Curtis, I hope I answered your question. But that is a huge issue that literally limits, and it has been a limiting factor in the number of African Americans going into the profession.
Okay. Jazz, I'm going to hand it back to you.
No, I just think he made some extremely valid points. Some of the dynamics you talked about are dynamics we can see across many systems that resemble the education system. So you're going to see some of those problematic things that you talk about, being a person of color trying to infiltrate and, ascend in these systems that aren't designed for us. And I'm meaning corporate America's education system, same on and so forth. And so I do think that it presents a unique challenge when we're trying to, groom and cultivate our children without them being able to see an example. And so I think that's a very powerful question, Curtis. And I think you did a really great job of summarizing why we see that struggle. Mm-hmm. All in all, I think this would be kind of my final question. And I think it would be a great way to kind of bring all this together. You mentioned something right before Curtis asked this question, which was giving us the difference between before integration and now.
Yes.
And so I think just something I would like to talk through, if we could get maybe a couple of key points as to what were the things in place before integration that we can kind of model as we are very integrated at this point. Can we take some of those values and some of that like passing of knowledge through community members and cultivating the success from within? What does that look like in a system that is very integrated now for us to build in a way that supports, so we're not leading a 4th generation into this dark hole is what I would call it, if that makes any sense.
Dr. T, before you answer that, I want to add another layer to what Jazz has said and maybe go back. How successful has the integration of blacks in the public school system been for Black America?
Y'all are on the money. integration was a belief. You know, grass is always greener on the other side. This is just me. I think integration, we had made such progress. Again, before integration, we were building our own community. We all know about Black Wall Street. We had more entrepreneurs. We were creating a culture in our own self-identity and growing stronger because of it.
Which is our, I'm sorry, I had to say this, which is our nature. Like, we are trying to flourish in a system that is not for us. Our nature is, you try to restrict us, we'll figure it out. And so I think that gave us a really beautiful example of just how brilliant we are without having to try to figure out how to be self in these systems that are never going to assist us. And so, sorry for the interjection, but I believe that just speaks to our natural ability to, again, build like economics and systems that do and are designed for us. And so, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, think about this, Jazz, and listeners. When you talk about the system, the one prior to integration, we had a system. But all systems are built on a mindset. It functions on a paradigm, a belief system that turns into actions that produce specific behaviors, right? Well, if you take a look at where we are with integration, what mindset has it created? We went into integration putting ourselves into a system not built for us, but we were using to our benefit. At the same time, there were inequities in that system. The system chose a method, and it proposed integration as a cheaper mechanism than providing equal resources. Right. I'm not going to double up and build double schools. I'm not going to double up on the number of books I'm building, although you ended up doing it anyway, because when you integrated the masses, you had to build more schools. When you added us, you had to buy more books anyway. But we presumed as a nation, this was an ideal held by our nation at the time, are we always going to live separate? So it was, I guess in many people's ideas, a natural progression. But in doing so, we gave up something. The system asked us to assimilate. It did not create a new standard of inclusion. It created a standard and processes that said assimilate. And I said this before. Standard,
rise to our standards.
Yes. Right. And what are you giving up in order to meet that standard? You have to lose some of your identity. Your identity is not recognized here. Some of your cultural components are not recognized here. So when you take a look at 30, 40 years of that, what have we lost? We now have gone about face. We now have a majority-minority school system. It's not just black and white. It's black, white, Latino. Fastest growing population is Asians. No one's talking about that. So we are going to be, in 2027, we're going to have a majority-minority workforce. In 2043, we're going to have a majority-minority nation. Is the school system ultimately going to have to readjust itself to address the identities? No one's talked about that yet. Right now, the response has been to keep the same system, shrink it, and preserve the standard that's already been set. So if you ask me about integration, it's a moot point when you look at where we are now. It is an autopsy that doesn't need to be had because it's been dead so long, it's starting to rot. So this is part of why some of the dialogue about history only needs to be understood, but not really debated. Because at some point, you're just going to keep digging up, cutting up pieces and taking out different parts. My question is, to what end? It is already dead. And what's dead is that self-determinism that existed in the black community was lost. The opportunity to regain it could never be clearer than it is today. Yes. With every reason, and this is why I think this conversation is important. It's not just what, it's why. If you can't understand why it's important, you won't understand what you need to do. Absolutely. It's important because we are becoming a browner nation, and there is nothing that suggests that's going to change over the next 50 years. You need to also understand that we have a brown school system taught by white majority school system where we have strong evidence of teacher bias, subconscious or not, it exists. There has been no effort on the part of the system to collectively address it. We also have courts that are supporting resegregation. We also have an educational institution that is no longer going to be looking into discrimination cases. You don't need to ask what you need to do. It's telling you. If somebody says, I'm about to hit you upside the head, you need to start believing them. You need to get prepared to duck.
And at the most basic level, if you can't even process all that, what we can see is clear evidence that this does not work on multiple levels. And so that is a powerful starting point. There is no evidence, no proof, no individual just evidence that this has or does work as far as school to success, equalizing it. And the few of us who have drugged through the trenches and figured it out, despite of, are just a small, minute portion of the larger population that is continuously failing us, our children's children, if we do not begin to, like you said, take this paradigm shift and drive it into action. And so I thank you on multiple levels for having this conversation with us 2 weeks in a row. But I think really we were able to pull some very powerful points, no matter if it's on an individual parent level all the way up to actually functioning in the schools, community level, and higher up. So I think across the board, we were able to provide some really clear solutions and actions that to assist with what we hope will be a ripple and a great change in the way in which we understand education in the Black community. So thank you so much.
Well,
you're very welcome.
I just want to add some comments here. One of my faithful followers, Dominique, has some quick comments here saying that overall teachers are devalued. This is cultural. Teachers are locus parentis. They spend more time with our children waking hours than any parent. That's heartbreaking. And then I'm sure Dr. T will agree, because it's one of his favorite terms. She says it's time for a cultural paradigm shift, understanding that the value of a teacher, regardless of color. Who tames the savage beast? Teachers. We can't rely on parents anymore. Some children have little or no contact with their parents.
Yes.
And she is so right. And let me throw out something before we close. You know, there's a dynamic in the Black community, particularly in our underserved communities, where it isn't cool to be smart. Well, I want to get the listeners to understand why that is. And that for the teachers out here, here's a way to connect and not so much to do something, but to understand it so you can develop a strategy.
Right.
That whole mindset came about because of assimilation. It's not learning that kids are ridiculed for. It's the assumption that they have chosen to assimilate. And this is why it's so important to have this discussion in Black communities about what education is. It is not relying on the system. It is self-determinism. It is self-determinism before I approach it. So for me, as one of these smart Black kids in school where other kids would go, oh, you're trying to be white. Let's call that what it is. No, I'm not, bruh. I'm just trying not to be poor.
Yes.
I just want to be this. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to do anything. I'm trying to get this. That is a huge paradigm shift amongst those student conversations. See, understand, peer relationships are as much a huge influence on learning outcomes as the teacher is. So when you start talking about underserved communities, when they go home, when they're outside of school, if self-determinism is not a factor, if they do not separate the educational system from their own goals, that dynamic is going to always prevent kids from stepping up even when they understand. It's self-preservation.
Right. Dr. T, I even believe that when children are saying, you know, you're trying to be white or education is not the cool, being smart is not the cool thing. I think what we're seeing in this generation that we're determining, because it's so bold and it's so abrupt and it's so assertive that it's defiant. But what I think our children are saying without, like you said, that small vocabulary or lack of emotional expression, what they're saying is, this doesn't make sense. And what you're trying to teach me isn't my life, is not going to take me to where I'm trying to go. And so I think they understand and they recognize what's happening. They're just not equipped to have this type of dialogue that says they're absolutely right. This teacher does have a culture bias. The teacher, you're not even a teacher, the system doesn't work for them. This education isn't going to help them sustain in day to day, and they have other ideas. And so I think it's also very powerful for us to validate that and help them trying to funnel that energy into a way that's, you're absolutely 100% correct. Here's what this looks like when you take a more assertive role in your life, that self-determinism that you talk about. So I think that's a very key point as well.
And teachers, to Dominique's point, it's one of my pet peeves is the teeth has been taken out of teaching. The voice for teachers is lost, and it has been literally hijacked. So they're literally in reactive mode. And again, it was at the core, another core issue amongst the three educators that I spoke with today. Their issue was, we use terms, educationese, about empowerment. We're going to build capacity. Well, define empowerment. What does that walk like, talk like, smell like, feel like? Because if you can't do that, it's just a word. And teachers have been engineered literally to respond to those words, and they don't even know it. Their internal mental models, when they hear this word, and they just accept it. Oh, he said empowerment. He must know what he's talking about. No, he just knew the word. And this is what we have devolved to. And it has not done justice to the professional educator. As a matter of fact, professional and educator, they don't go together in this climate, in this culture. I will debate that with anybody. Is there a strong desire to be professional? Absolutely. But I am hard pressed to find a collective effort on the part of the educational system to create a professional environment. And they use terms like professional learning community. Give me a break. Give me a break. Those are basic expectations that they put a label on it and created an industry around. I call it BS.
Beautiful.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up because it's been another epic conversation. As you can tell, we could go on forever and ever, but we're not going to go on forever. We've already done 2 parts of this. We're going to put it to rest. I wouldn't say put it to bed, but we're going to put it to rest for now. Dr. T, as always, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to share with us.
Thank you, guys.
But before we let you leave, if you can give 30 seconds, can you give some call to actions for the education system and for Blacks when it comes to this equalization and education issue?
Well, call to action, stop using the term educational system. I need our people to remove that. I think I need all people. Remove it from your mental model. It is a system, doesn't benefit you. Stop using it. Replace it with learning opportunities. Then you own it. That learning opportunities are for you because then you become the evaluator, not a participant. That's really huge. Number 2, read, focus on vocabulary. If you're a Black parent, ask your child questions and do not just ask, what did you do in school today? Be specific. What did you do in science today? Ask follow-up questions. What was good about it? What didn't work for you? Without judgment. Kids don't like to be judged. This is why they don't respond. You're not going to teach them. You don't have the answers. Ask the question. Make your questioning allow them to question their own expectations. They have to develop a voice around the things they're even thinking about. Kids don't naturally do that. You do that as an adult. Don't assume they do. That's your job as a parent. Ask leading questions without judgment. Make it safe for them to give an answer they don't know the question to or doesn't meet your expectations. Save it for a future conversation. That's where you get to be the leader to help them develop self-determinism.
I love it.
If you judge them, they'll shut down. That conversation's over.
Excellent. Well, that's a wrap. Fait accompli. Dr. T, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Smoke signals, man. Wherever you are, light a fire.
We're going all the way back, right?
Go all the way back. You can reach me by email at drteducates, drteducates.com. You can reach me at Twitter at drteducates and also on Facebook at drteducates.
Excellent. And Jazz, any final words?
Yeah, I don't think that I should even speak because I run the risk of us prolonging this discussion. And as we agreed, it is being laid to rest with action steps to move forward. I used to like to thank Dr. T for the insight, the dialogue, the gems of knowledge, and being so passionate as to move through this education system for 26 years and being sure that you are bringing others along with you. So thank you for that work. And of course, thank you for being on Stuff. And I am completely full, so I don't have
Okay, now there's two things that two things that still have to be addressed. First of all, Dr. T, tell people about your shows.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not a self-promoter. I host a weekly podcast on Mondays. It's called In the Bullpen with Dr. T, and I focus on issues that affect schools and communities. And one of my methods, I always try to bring experts on around discussions all about education, whether it's university professors or whatever. I pick a topic that's relative to where we are, and I give access to people you might not have access to, straight out of the headlines. And I also do a Tuesday and Thursday morning show, a little bit more lighthearted. They can get funny. They can also be pretty intense, but it's a lot of fun. And that's every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Excellent.
Awesome.
And Jazz Keys, give your contact information, please.
Sure. I'm a simple girl, so you can find me on all social media outlets by the name Jazz Keys, JAZZKEYES, or you can go to my website, www.jazzkeys.com. Again, no matter which way you search, you should land to me. So I keep it very simple.
Excellent. That is good. I don't want people not knowing how to find either one of you. I am Dr. Vibe here. I'm host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, the home of Epic Conversations, and I'm the host of Epic Conversations. I'm also a certified empowerment coach and president and CEO of Express Your Vibe Coaching Communications. If you want to touch base with me, three best ways: Twitter at drvibeshow, email address dr.vibe at the drvibeshow.com, and website address www.the.drvibeshow.com. If you want to watch video replays of my epic conversations, go to the YouTube channel. I'm so happy we finally have over 200 people subscribing, which is outstanding. And yes, awesome. I do have to do a 200 subscribers celebration. That'll probably come next week. If you want to listen to replays via audio, you can go to the website. You can go to Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, also Stitcher Radio, Selective Conversations audio-wise, also on the goodmenproject.com, and also WJMSradio.com. So, as always, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who watched live and may help make this epic conversation. Curtis Brooks and Dominique, thank you for your contributions. They're always appreciated and not taken for granted. Also, there was another person, can't leave out, Whitney Gray. Whitney Gray also. If you're watching live, thank you. If you're watching on the replay, even more thanks. So, we will catch you very soon, probably next week, on Stuff. And also upcoming conversations. Next on the Dr. Vibe Show Sunday night is the weekly Black Men's Roundtable called Do You Know What Time It Is? And one of the scheduled guests we have audio-wise next week, in the middle of next week, is we actually have a senior VP from Black Enterprise magazine going to be coming on the Dr. Vibe Show talking about Black Enterprise Modern Man program. They're highlighting black men from all around the world. Alfred Edmond Jr. is his name, and he is going to be on the Dr. Vibe Show next week. So, as always, I like to say you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles, and you're a solution for someone's problem. God bless, peace to all, keep the faith. And two last things I like to say. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. And also, sometimes you have to get bigger. So sometimes get smaller to get bigger. God bless, peace to all, keep the faith, and thanks for making this an epic conversation. Good night, everybody.
Good night, guys.